Okay. So today there's a couple of things that I wanted to cover. One of which was bronze fills. I was asked earlier in the week how to do bronze. Um, the bronze fill is over here in the granite fills section, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense since this says granite fills, but I really only have one section right now. So bronze fills are under here. And to find it, these fills get sorted alphabetically. So the bronze, if you go after the blue pearls, bronze is going to be the next one here. If you make these bigger, you can see them a little bit better. Usually, depending on how big my stuff is, if I want to see them huge, I'll usually do 2 by 2. So if you actually click on this, you can use your left and right arrow keys to make those bigger and smaller, just to make sure that they fit exactly how you want them. So if I had them 2 by 2 and scroll down a little bit, you'll see this one. So it's kind of hard to tell just because it's just brown, right? But anyway, that's the bronze fill. So the way that the bronze fills work, and I've already got this design set up to work with them, but this is 20% gray, which normally is going to be rock pitching. And then this is 30% gray, which is normally going to be polish. And then this is 10%, which is normally going to be frost. But when it comes to using the the bronze, if we select that and fill with bronze, the way that it maps those colors is that it will do this gold looking, as if the bronze had been sanded down, or I don't know exactly the process that they use, but anyway, so that's the more gold look to it, and that would be then coming from 20% gray, which again is normally rock pitching. And then the polish gives you just that dark brown patina there. And then the frosted look is what gives you that border around the edge. So I've really only got those three colors when it comes to bronze. I think it'd be good to add more, but it's a start at least. So that's how bronze works. If I were to do it manually, this would be 10%, this would be 20%, and this would be 30%. And you'll see how those different ones work out. So 10, 20, and 30. When you're doing stuff on top of other colors, so in this case, my bronze is supposed to be sitting on top of granite, and then that granite is sitting in grass. In order to fill those different things, what I would do is I would fill one at a time. So I filled my bronze, I grabbed all that at the same time. My granite color, it doesn't need to select more than one thing, it's just a single piece. So I can go and I must have that set for the wrong color. So let's go back to polish here, 30% gray. There we go. Oh, you know what, instead of, let's back up here a little bit. I know why this is wrong. So this is 20% gray, and this is 30%, and this is 10%. And the reason for that is there's this fill called ground. And the way that ground works is if we select, I'm going to select this stuff, which is what we've already filled. And then I'm going to invert my selection, which selects everything but that. So now I've got those other pieces selected. And if I ground fill, then that's going to give me concrete, dirt, and grass. And so that's why this was set the way that it was. If we go back to the grayscales, this was set for 20% because in the ground fill, 20% turns into concrete, 30% turns into dirt, and 10% turns into grass. So that's why that was set before. If I, so let's go ahead and restore those. If I wanted to change it from the concrete fill to a granite fill, then I would need to change this to 30% and then refill it. That way it's going to fill with polished granite, not the rock pitched granite. So it takes a little getting used to, but because of the way that the fills scale and stretch and tile and that sort of stuff, that's how we that's why we needed to do it in those orders as far as applying the grayscales to those colors. But it ends up looking pretty good that way, I think. So gives you a pretty decent representation of what a bronze is going to look like on granite and or concrete. So if I want to go back to concrete, I just go back to 20% and then refill, and it'll put my concrete in there. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to discuss was getting things to your cutter. Excuse me. I'm going to, let's just load up a design. 349. Let's open that up and see what that is. I don't even know what it is. I'm just guessing. Okay, so we've got this design here that needs to get cut. So when it comes time to cutting, if we take this and hit our plot page, okay, the reason that we create a plot page is that way these pieces that are separate from the rest of the design can stay that way, and this portion of the design will let us weld these things together and get things ready to cut without messing with the original, right? So we're going to work on a plot page to get this ready to cut. And also, one thing with this particular design, and this came up the other day from another customer, is that we found out that this design had the panels duplicated. If you see that, if I move those apart from each other, the inside portion of the panel is duplicated. So we're going to need to fix that in an update. But for design 349, if you've ever used it and ever ran into troubles, that's why. It's because those lines are duplicated. So we're going to delete that duplicated piece. We don't want it. I think that's the only portion that was messed up. So we will go from there. But because these are already combined together, we don't have to do anything. Normally they're not. So normally they're broken up like this so that they're individual pieces, or maybe they're, some of them are combined, but not all of them. So normally you would grab all of these, and I'm holding Alt while I do that. Let me get my on-screen display coming back up here real quick. See if I can grab my on-screen display. It's in the wrong spot. Give me just a second here. Oh my gosh. And I'm trying to get this onto the right monitor. At the very start. Let's try. No. Sorry about this. Toggle positions. Okay. That's not it either. All right. Sorry, it's taking so long. Here we go. See, that works better. Let's try that one. Okay, we'll try that. Sorry about that. So anyway, I was holding Alt while left click marquee box selecting. And what that does is it just grabs all of those at the same time rather than me having to shift select or whatever. So if I grab all of them, I combine them together, then I'm going to hold shift, select this one and hit W to weld. And do the same thing over here. Hold shift, click on just the outline and hit W to weld. So I've got that welded. This particular font, Times New Roman, I mean, it's pretty thin. It's got pretty thin serifs. So normally I would thicken this up a little bit. So I would grab these and hit D on the keyboard or come up and hit my bold object button. And that's just going to thicken that up a little bit, make it sandblast a little nicer. So we got that all ready to go. And now it comes to sending it to the cutter, right? This particular one is 24 by 20. So it's probably not going to matter too much which direction it goes. But the question was asked, how do we tell, when we send this to the cutter, what direction it's going to go? When it comes to an Allen Datagraph cutter, we can just click up here on the direct cut button, and it's going to automatically send out of CorelDRAW into Allen's direct cut interface. And if we look at the way that interface works, we've got dots over here and dots over here. Those are to simulate where the holes are punched on your stencil, which in today's day and age, punched stencils hot commodity. So hopefully you guys have some if you're running a punch cutter. But anyway, so that's showing you how that works. There are options up here for origin, which will make it go in different directions. But then there's also, if you go to properties, well, okay, so I don't actually have a cutter hooked up and plugged in. But if I did, there would be, under properties, there's an option for rotate, which gives you the option to rotate 90 degrees or 270 degrees or whatever. So that way you can rotate it if you need to cut it differently on the machine. I find it actually faster to just get it set up first in Memorial Designer here, the way that I want it to cut, and then send it. So if I wanted to rotate it, I could grab it and up here rotate it 90 degrees first and then send it that way. So normally I will lay out a few different things to cut. So let's just assume that we had multiple pieces. I would go like this and lay this out that way. Obviously these are, the exact same, and normally they're not going to be, but just to show you how I would normally cut things. That's the method that I use, except that I'll not cut the shape. I don't like to cut the shape. And I haven't done production for a while, so I don't have my macro set up to do it, but normally I had a macro set up to go ahead and do this for me, where I would come and delete these pieces because I don't really need them. And that one I do need. So I would only cut that portion. And then this one, same thing, except I don't need to have this bottom line because there's already a bottom line from the other one there. So I don't need that line either. So I'm just going to come in here and create a couple pieces like this. Like that. So that's what I would cut normally. The reason I don't cut the outline is because that gives me a little bit of overlap when it comes to the stencil. And so I don't have to patch on those edges or on the top. And the bottom is what we use to align with. So when this is cut out, we would take the bottom left-hand corner, align that to the bottom left-hand corner of the piece, and then align it that way. But that only works if you have things sized exactly. So that's another thing that we would do is we'd come in and make sure this was 24.5. And this one was 23.75 or whatever the case is, for making them size exactly the way that they are. So we would do that first. We would measure every piece, but we were just a small shop, so we could do that. In larger shops, maybe that's not necessarily the case. Oftentimes people are cutting, even in different locations than where the stone is. So That's not often always an option, but that's how we did it at our shop, is we'd measure every piece and we'd get it cut. So now that this is longer, okay, if it were rotated back this way when we sent it to the cutter, it's and pull this back over, it's now too wide for that cutter because it's 40 inches wide and the stencil would only be what, 30 inches or whatever the case may be, 36 inches, 30 inches, 25 inches, whatever it is, as far as the stencil. So this is too wide, and so that's when you would need to rotate it. And again, I think it's easiest just to do that in CorelDRAW as opposed to coming into the properties here. But if you forget to, and you already sent the stuff, you can always go to properties and rotate it there. So I would rotate this first, and then I'd send it off. And if I were sending this to a different cutter, like an APD, an Advanced Plotting Devices plotter, I would do the same thing as far as getting it laid out, and I would still do it the same way, left to right like this, because the cutter, when it comes to the flatbed, has a bed that is 60 by 30, something like this. And all I would need to do is position this where I want it to be. And it starts at the lower left-hand corner of the table. So it's going to start down here and cut this way. So that's what I would do if I was laying out something for the flatbed, is just, position everything on that table the way that I want, and then send it to cut. For the flatbed, you actually just export a PLT file, an HPGL PLT file, and then that'll go to the cutter there. There are some questions in the chat. There's some chat stuff, so I'm going to look at that here really quick. Derek said that recently they've noticed the plotter can skip or jump around, causing disproportionate spacing between cuts. And then Aaron said they've got an Allen data graph and it will occasionally give us fat lines, where what they're talking about is when it cuts. Sometimes what happens when you've got a cutter that's moving back and forth in order to cut these lines, so it's moving that stencil through the cutter back and forth. A lot of times, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but sometimes what happens is that this piece here may start somewhere like that. So it ends up being thin on one end and oftentimes too thick on the other end, because that back and forth movement. Sometimes that has to do with the thickness of your stencil, and as those pinch wheels go over it back and forth, it compresses, and so there's going to be some of that happening. There's also stretch in the stencil. It can stretch as it goes back and forth and as it heats up, and all sorts of different things. So that's something to pay attention to. And unfortunately, that's one of the downsides of having a drum or a roll cutter, is that it's rolling that stencil back and forth. And so that's one of the side effects that can happen. Now, it's often a mechanical thing where you can tweak the settings and get it to work right. I don't work on those machines, so I don't know all those settings, and each machine is going to be a little different. So I'd suggest going to your manufacturer of whatever machine you're working with to see if you can, tweak those settings and get your tension and all that stuff set correctly. But that is one of the big reasons that I push flatbed cutters as much as I do, and that's because it's not moving the stencil, it's only moving the head of the machine. So the stencil itself is stuck, and it's just moving the head. So that's great. And also, your stencil doesn't have to be punched, which in today's world is great, because then you can still get stencil. But anyway. And Derek said that they've tried combining and joining, but it doesn't always seem to bring the desired result. I highly doubt that it's a software problem. Most of the time, when you're seeing stuff like that, it is mechanical. It either has to do with the motors and the drive system of the thing itself. It has a lot to do with the weight of the stencil. has to do with the tension, how the stencil is fed, and sometimes even the way that the stencil is punched. If it's punched incorrectly and it's not pulling, has to do with the thickness. There's a lot of different variables when it comes to moving stencil through a machine. So most of it has to do with that and not so much the software. Now, if you are getting something, and Analia has mentioned this before, she's seen stuff like this, where she's gotten an extra line like that, or some stray line that doesn't exist, something like that. If you're seeing stuff like that, that's more than likely something software based, that it's not reading that file correctly, or it's maybe trying to auto close something, or whatever the case may be. That kind of stuff is more software based than anything else. But if it has to do with it's cutting correctly, just not in the right place, that's more hardware than anything else. But anyway, so that's how you would get a file out of your plot page and to a cutter. Hopefully it's not too terribly difficult. I really like the workflow for for Allen Datagraph that they've got direct cut. That is definitely one benefit of that. And there are other cutters out there that have that same option. I don't think I have any installed down here. No, I don't. But the GraphTech, for instance, you go up to launch here and you can send it to their cutter that way. But anyway, so that is how I would get things to a cutter and rotate and all that. I like to do it all here in CorelDRAW in Memorial Designer before I ever send it off to the cutter. So all it's doing is exactly what I told it to do, as opposed to trying to do any of that stuff on its own. So that's really the stuff that I wanted to cover today. I know that's kind of short, but that's what I had on my plate. So I don't know if you have anything else that you would like to discuss. We can keep going down the line of Dockers if we want to. Let's try to see. Envelope extrude. So I used find and replace the other day because we had some text that was coming in and it was kind of formatted really weird. And I don't know that I've got a really good example of it, but we had some text that we were copying and pasting from a PDF file, and the way it came in was just all wonky. And so we ended up using find and replace text, and then we were looking for hard returns, because the way that it was working was there were hard returns where there shouldn't have been. So we looked for hard returns, and then we replaced with I think we probably replaced them with spaces instead. And we were just working on the current page, and we did all that. So that's what we did. I mean, there's no text in this, so it's not going to find anything, but let's just simulate. We'll go like this. So let's say we had some text like this, and this is the way that it came in, where this should be just one line. It had stuff like that. And so we did a find and replace to find all of the hard returns, and it worked out pretty well. I don't know. We're just doing a find here. We want to do a replace. So if I say replace and replace all, it will go through and replace all of those hard returns with spaces. And so that way, we didn't have to manually go through and go like this, where we had to go delete space, delete space, delete space, because that's how you would do it manually. You would delete that hard return and then you do a space, right? But instead of having to do that manually, we just used find and replace hard returns with spaces and replace all of them, and it did the whole thing all at once, which is pretty darn cool that you can do that. And I've got this, I've done things like this quite a bit where I wanted to replace maybe, I don't know, let's just say an asterisk or a comma, or maybe it's, I don't know, there's different cases in which this has happened. But I would go and, have it find and the Docker here is new, so I think you can just type stuff in. I haven't really used this, but yeah, okay, so I can find that left bracket like that, and I can replace it with a space. So let's see if that works. So I've got a bracket right there. If I want to replace it with a space, we hit replace all, and there you go. You can see how it got replaced with a space. So I've run into that stuff before as well. Find and replace is great for that sort of stuff. And it doesn't just work with text. There's also things like objects where you can add queries to, I don't know, things that are red and replace them, or just help you find things that are red. So if this was red, this one here, I just right click to make it red. If I were to say from selection, let's see how this works. Properties from selection. Okay, and then let's make another one over here. Actually, let's just make a new one over here, and we'll make that red. So let's see if we find red objects just by saying find all. So you can see that it found this red object over here. And if I want to, I don't have to do find all. I can just click through find next. So you can see it's finding the next object. I don't know let's edit the query and see what it's looking for. It's looking for curves. It's looking for the outline properties of the curve. So you can see how it's got red there. It's got the width of the curve. So by doing the from selection, it auto-populated all of these different things that it's going to search for. So that way it's, able to find those different things for us. But I use find and replace, I would say seldomly, but when I do use it, it sure saves me time, because otherwise I'd have to manually go and do those things. If I wanted to find all text, that's pretty easy. You can just go up to edit and say select all text. But if I wanted to select all text of a certain size or a certain font, that sort of stuff, then that's what find and replace is for. Again, you can go up to select all and say, objects, and that's going to select everything. But if you want to select all red objects, then that's what find and replace is for. And whether you're, finding or replacing, there's options for both there. So, so if we said outline properties here, and let's see, I don't think this is going to let us choose scale that one over print. Yeah, I don't think this lets us choose based on an object. That would be cool if it did. And so that's what find and replace does, is let you find objects of certain types and then replace them, or find text with certain characteristics and replace that. All right, any questions on anything, guys? Anything else you'd like to see? Otherwise, I'm just gonna cut it short today, if that's cool with you guys. My sons actually have their birthday party today, so we're headed out of town early to catch that. So that's where we're going to go. Next week, I'm actually going to be out of state, so we will not have a meeting next week on the 11th. I'll be flying home actually on the 11th, so we will resume on the 18th. So thanks for showing up. And oh, let's see. Derek said, can you touch on why test should be left as artistic text of converted to object shape lines? Can you touch on why text should be left as artistic instead of converted to object shape lines? Okay. Depends on what you're doing, Derek. Why you would want text to be text or converted to a curve. The majority or the biggest reason why you want it to stay as text is that it's editable as text. So this text right here, I can swipe, I can change the text, I can change the font, I can change the size, all that sort of stuff I can change super quickly because it's still text, okay? If you convert it to anything else, so if I right click on this and convert it to curves, it's no longer text. And so I can't swipe it anymore. I can't change it just by, you know, swiping that text. If I wanted to change it, I would have to literally go in and find a letter A. Let's ungroup this. And we'd have to find a letter A and move that letter A or copy that letter A or whatever, you know, which takes forever. The benefit of switching over to curves is that you can make changes to the text that you couldn't normally do. So if you were trying to match something, let's say you were trying to match this letter A on a different font, but their bar was higher, you could, you know, take this and move it up like that. Take this and move it up like that, and do the same thing for this one. So you can do that sort of stuff when it's converted to curves, but you can't do that when it's still text, unless, you know, it's a special font that's got the ability to do that. But those are the main reasons why you would want to leave text as text as opposed to converting it to something else. When I did this text here, when I hit the bold button, it actually converts it to text when it does that. So I can't edit this anymore. But the reason the bold button exists is that it's super fast and easy to make that bolder without having to do anything crazy to it. And if I wanted to make it thinner, I could hold shift and click on it and it's going to go the opposite direction. So you can make that thicker, but now it's not editable. I don't really care. I'm not going to change that anymore. If I really wanted to edit it, I could go back to my original here and, you know, mess with my original and start over or change it there. But I am not concerned about the editability of this text. What I'm concerned about is the sandblastability of this text. And so that's why I made it thicker, so that these lines aren't quite so thin. So hopefully that explains why I would leave things as text as opposed to switching them over to curves. But thanks again for coming today, guys. Appreciate it. Sorry I was a few minutes late, but we will see you on the 18th.
All right, thanks. Take care.
Yep, you have a good one.